Okay, here we go. Hello, and welcome to the BloodStream podcast, a show serving the bleeding disorders community. I'm your patient advocate and host, Patrick James Lynch.
And I am your other host and advocate and all the other things, Amy Bourne.
Nonprofit nerd, you can't leave it out.
I am a nonprofit nerd.
On today's show, Amy and I are streaming live to BloodStream Media's Facebook page. We will be discussing, has your chronic disease ever made you feel less than in your life? A topic of interest to me lately, a conversation that was started online a couple days ago, and something that we're excited to dive into. It's also a couple of headlines from articles recently that caught our attention. Females account for 1 in 5 mild hemophilia cases at U.S. centers. That definitely stood out as something recently published in Hemophilia News Today. 1 in 5. We'll get into what that means and why that's significant. And Syrians claim, Syrians, as in the country of Syria, people from it, Syrians.
Great clarification.
Claim the first case of a girl born with both hemophilia A and C. The first case, only 10 in history documented.
Yes,
this is the first.
Males. Female. This is the first female.
And then lastly, the latest from Let's Talk, our mental health segment featuring Joshua Sterling Bragg. We will present that, a segment that also features clinical psychologist Emily Wheat a little bit later, and Emily and I will react to that. We've got all that and more coming up today. Thank you all for listening. For those joining us live, thank you for watching. You can support the BloodStream podcast, by the way, simply by subscribing.
Just subscribing.
That's all it takes, and then you support the BloodStream podcast.
Then you are a supporter.
You don't have to donate to us. There's no fundraising drives. We don't send out emails like that. All you do is hit subscribe.
Literally just subscribe.
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that you can subscribe to a podcast.
Literally whatever is your thing.
You can share our content on social media. The BloodStream Podcast Facebook page is a great home base for all of our content.
And that would just be a bonus.
In fact, you can do all of those things. You can rate, you can review. And you can email us. What's that email address again, Amy?
Great. This is the test. It's BloodStream Media No.
Yes.
BloodStream Media mailbag?
No. Nope.
Mailbag at bloodstreammedia.com.
Third time's a charm. Mailbag at bloodstreammedia.com if there's a topic, guest, or something that you would like to hear us discuss more. And listeners, I would like to remind you that the BloodStream podcast is made possible by our presenting sponsor, Takeda.
Takeda.
Yes, that's right. Takeda. They've got this website. BleedingDisorders.com. This is their name and logo, by the way.
This is not the website.
You couldn't tell. Yeah, this is just a placard. But the website's BleedingDisorders.com. And that's a place that you can go to learn all about Takeda's resources for and commitment to the bleeding disorders community.
Yes.
You see, Takeda believes in a world free of bleeds. I'm for it. And they are dedicated more than ever in their efforts to offer a wide range of programs and support to help patients throughout their treatment journey, wherever on that journey you may be, and it is indeed a journey. You can learn more by simply visiting bleedingdisorders.com. One more time, grab a pen, though you shouldn't need it. That's bleedingdisorders.com. And for their founding and ongoing support of the BloodStream podcast, as always, I would just like to say, thanks Takeda. All right. So got a lot of topics. We got a
so many
talk
topics.
segment. But before we get into all of that, as always, I want to start the show as I like to, which is, it's funny. We were just talking about how busy we all are. I check in with you more here than in life. So let's start that way. Amy, hi, how are you?
I'm so good. And I'm very busy. It's a nutso week here at Believe in BloodStream Media. So many things going on.
It's a banana cakes week. Natalie and I are trying to bring back banana cakes.
I respect that.
Thank you.
Respect it.
Thank you.
I actually, I'm going to throw it back to you, because I wanted to prep this a little bit because it's coming down the pipe and we're doing this
nervous.
tomorrow.
What's happening? Okay.
I wanted to discuss, we had the Flow ladies, the Flow podcast, which is about straight talk for women who experience extreme periods.
Holler.
And our next episode, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it.
You are. I can see them.
We're very excited about it. We have invited Patrick and 2 of our Believe dudes, Joshua Sterling Bragg and Rob Bradford, both have been on the podcast to have a discussion about periods.
Yeah. And I'm nervous about that.
The dude perspective.
Can I tell you something, BloodStream folks? I got a handout earlier today from show producer and host Jessica Lauren Richmond. Shouts out to Jay Rich. Here's for the non-menstruator assembly. I'm a part of the non-menstruator assembly. And there's a whole list of questions, including what do you already know and how do you know it about the anatomy of menstruation? I'm not going to lie. I got to that question, the first one, and I stopped. And I started to write things down in pencil. You can maybe see it if you're looking. And I was like, I have to do homework. Amy, I got to be honest. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed by my inability to answer this sheet with anything close to literacy. I'm embarrassed. I have to go home and do homework because I'm not showing up on the show tomorrow as empty-minded as I currently am about menstruation and all related things. This is one of the most, it's a busy week, as you said. Receiving this document earlier today has been the most stressful part of it for me.
Oh my gosh.
I know nothing about menstruation.
Oh my God. Well, I think first of all, like we were giggling about it, we really don't want this to be gotcha journalism. Like we're not going to be like, oh no, you got that wrong. This is an inclusive environment. I think it speaks more to like our society. I know this sounds ridiculous, but our society and our upbringing, like you don't know.
Right.
And we don't talk about it. And that's half of what we talk about on the show is like, even as women, we don't talk about it. Like I barely talk about it with my friends.
Yeah.
And then what, at least here in the Believe world, once we started Flow, this podcast, all of us started talking about it.
It's so
and which is fantastic. And it's been kind of incredible of how it affects us, how it affects our relationships. And so we're so excited. We just think this is a conversation in the world of women's health, feminine health, menstrual cycle health that, we just don't talk about. And so we're so excited. So it's going to be it'll be the October episode of Flow. Please check it out. It'll be
so nervous.
Wonderful.
I'm so nervous. It's going to be so, I have to, if I don't do homework, there's going to be no content. I'm just not going to have any good contributions to make. I think your point's a good one. Like, what does that say about us more broadly? But, just individually, I'm like, oh boy, I got to catch up quick here. So that's coming up.
Anyway, psyched about that. It's going to be great.
Well, speaking of things coming up in October, we're also going to have Mil Forrest, host, producer, writer on the Pain podcast. Season 3. The trailer's out now. If you are subscribed, good, well done. If not, come on. The Pain podcast, it's in all the same places as the BloodStream podcast, our show on the experience of chronic pain. And this season is looking specifically, we've talked about this before, so I'll be quick, at the psychosocial elements that contribute to a person's experience of pain. So we spent a lot of time so far on the biology of pain. We've spent a lot of time on patient experiences with pain. And now we want to kind of take a look at the cultural, societal impact of the perception of pain and how the perception of pain influences the experience of pain. Sounds kind of convoluted, but it's actually super interesting if you're nerdy into the world of chronic pain.
Yes,
look, as someone who lives with a lot of chronic pain, I like hearing the different perspectives and hearing the way different people process what it means to live in pain, the different tools people have used. Yeah. Anyway, Mel's going to be on here on October 8th, so that'll be the next episode after this one, to talk about about pain podcast and chronic pain, things she learned from the BDC and so forth. And then one other thing happening on the next episode that I want to mention before you and I start chatting about
very exciting
the impact of chronic disease and feeling less than. Stop the Bleeding, little comedic web series going into its 11th season.
11th season.
At this point, we've surpassed like most shows.
Your career.
The thing that launched my career way back in the day of 2012. We're not going to talk about it right here. I did do a little bit of teasing yesterday. If you're a Twitter or Facebook user, you may have seen it because Family Guy pushed something out related to the COVID vaccine using their Family Guy animated world.
Correct.
And without giving you any other specifics, I just made some references to how there were some real similarities between what they were doing and Stop the Bleeding 2021.
Yeah.
There's a lot more that's going to be coming. If you're following me or Amy or the Believe World on social media, you'll start seeing stuff for it a little bit sooner, but we'll be back here on BloodStream talking about Stop the Bleeding on October 8th.
That was a good tease, and it's like worthy of a good tease. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you.
I'm very excited about it.
All right, so let's talk now about, has chronic disease ever made you feel less than in your life? That's the title of our next discussion topic. And listeners, this portion of today's show is brought to you by Genentech. Genentech, they're a leader in the hemophilia community that's committed to advancing all aspects of life with hemophilia, starting with patient care. Genentech takes the safety of people with hemophilia A very seriously. Good. I like hearing that plainly spoken. That's why they monitor all their treatments to create innovative and effective solutions for the community. Approved. To learn about Genentech's treatments and how they may help, visit treathemophilia.com.
Treat hemophilia.
Treat hemophilia, another easy one.
Treathemophilia.com.
Treathemophilia.com. Easy to remember, don't need a pen.
Domains are great.
So, Amy.
Yeah.
I've been catching up with some Blood Brothers recently.
Yeah.
And which has been nice. Couple chats following BDC and a little bit of activity. There was just like kind of an instinct, and there were some phone calls around. So that was kind of fun.
That's cool.
But one guy in particular, we were talking about this topic of feeling less than. And I'm not going to mention, we'll call him Ralph. His name isn't Ralph, but we'll call him Ralph. Fictional Ralph.
Which, let me just say, if there's a Ralph, I can't think of a Ralph.
I don't know a Ralph person.
In the
Cramden. I know Ralph Cramden.
Okay.
From the Honeymooners.
Oh, that's not in the hemophilia community. Okay.
Not that we know of.
If there's a Ralph listening in the hemophilia community, feel free, let us know, because we cannot think of a Ralph.
Mailbag at bloodstreammedia.com.
Mailbag at bloodstreammedia.com.
Come on, Ralph. All right, so me and Ralph, we were talking, and we were talking about these feelings of being less than, or feeling less than, feeling not good enough.
Yeah.
Professionally, personally, in all the roles. Feelings of like, oh, I'm going to be found out for being not deserving, not worthy, not enough. And I know that these are not feelings exclusive to someone with a bleeding disorder. As I say some of this, like imposter syndrome, which is a term used in mental health world, like that comes to mind. But as he and I in particular were commiserating about the ways that growing up with a chronic blood disorder has contributed to now operating as full-grown adult men with some pretty deep-seated insecurities and worries, that got me thinking about this topic of feeling less than because of a chronic disease a bit more broadly. So the things that for me, like when I think back to childhood and to experiences with peers in school, extracurricular, there are so many examples of times where either because of something going on like a bleed, or I'm recovering from a bleed, or it's a gym and it's something high contact I can't participate in, being treated differently or having to have modifications for me, and some of them for good reason. And then
having that be public. It's like a public
and having
thing.
That be public. Yeah.
I think that's a different thing.
And then there's the perceptions too. And like the wondering about like, am I being judged for this? Or if I speak up about this thing, or if I suggest that like, oh, if I do pull-ups as part of the fitness test, like I have an elbow thing, I don't want to out myself. So I think for a very long time, I've operated from a place of feeling like it's not safe for me to admit if I need support, if I need help, because I could be judged, I could be ostracized. And as is, I'm feeling overly catered to in a number of environments as a young person when I am telling a coach or a gym teacher, or have to go and stay after school so I have extra time, for whatever the case may be. So there are all these experiences of feeling different, feeling less than. And I guess something I'm curious to know from you, you did not grow up with hemophilia or a chronic blood disorder, but do you relate to feelings like kind of persistent or chronic or reoccurring feelings of feeling less than? Does any of this resonate for you, or does it sound more foreign?
No, I think it's a very human thing, and I'd be shocked if there was a human on the planet that couldn't identify to feeling less than at some point in their life. I do think I could imagine that experiencing hemophilia in particular as a young man, as a child, when you are classified as being, your boyhood or your manhood is all classified in physicality, and not being able to do those things or having to modify those things, that is an extremely defining challenge to go through. Mine was not necessarily as a child, because it wasn't public. It was just, internal, normal stuff about, not feeling normal, or, not, I was a redhead, so I just felt weird. I wouldn't equate that to that. Mine came, for the majority of my life, I have been single, and I have not been able to have a relationship. And I really, truly thought something was wrong with me for decades.
Oh, interesting.
And it clouded a lot of time, but it was like my 20s and 30s were fairly excruciating, because I didn't, this thing that you're supposed to do that I wanted, I guess I couldn't even admit that I wanted. It was so painful that I didn't have, and I couldn't.
Wanted a relationship, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just want, and it got to the point where, people around me, I think, were kind of concerned. They were concerned.
Sure.
And, you just like feel the weight of that.
Yeah.
So, that's where my darkest time came from in that period of my life.
That's really interesting. So I posted about this on Facebook, and I had a feeling that people would respond. But it was literally this question: has your chronic disease ever made you feel less than in your life?
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of responses, and I've de-identified them, and I want to share a few. One in particular, actually, you just reminded me of. So this comes from somebody who responded to that post. Member of the bleeding disorders community. I felt less than when I was 17, when it was finally confirmed that I had HIV. So someone from the contamination crisis. I had so many family members and friends from the hemophilia community try to convince me that no one outside of my family could or would ever love me in a romantic relationship. I internalized this message and realized now, as a 54-year-old still living with HIV, that this message significantly impacted many decisions in my life. Sometimes for the good, but many for the worst. My parents went out and bought my grave plot and proceeded to share that with me. They and others told a romantic interest of mine that person shouldn't bother, and warned that person about what that person was getting into. I only learned of this in the last 2 years, and it devastates me even now. I also feel less than when I cannot participate in activities with my teenagers fully because of joint damage. I feel like I'm making excuses to not fill in the blank, even though I'm racked with ankle pain. So talk about feeling as though not being worthy of relationship, or like something might be wrong to have your own parents.
And to feel the weight of someone else's fear. I mean, that was somebody else's fear being projected onto this person.
There's someone else who shares about that too. They said to the question, yes, late in life diagnosis after years of being pushed to keep going. Now it's a struggle to keep going from damage. Yet the expectations of others have increased tenfold in spite of the issues. The expectations and constant pain increase the less than mindset. So again, the expectations is fear, and something that somebody else is owning over there is causing the individual to feel less than. I thought this was interesting too. Actually, this came from a blood brother that a number of people responded to this comment. I think it resonated. So he said, generally, being told you can't do something contributed to this feeling. However, this was more impactful when I was in my youth. Thanks to good examples and mentors of those with hemophilia, it helped me to see a path forward and realize just because someone told me I couldn't do something didn't mean it was true, though I realized the intent was usually good to protect me, etc. And that's a sneaky piece too, is people's good intentions can sometimes be experienced on this end as imbuing their fear, their whatever it is onto me.
Yes. And I just want to mention that this was a dialogue and a conversation on Patrick's personal Facebook page, which is very open. You don't have to necessarily, I don't believe, follow.
I don't think so.
But anyway, feel free to friend Patrick. He will, he friends anybody in the community. But I just wanted to mention that because it's such a rarity to experience this type of community in a way. And if maybe you're feeling alone tonight, or when you're listening, maybe head on over and join the community there on Patrick's page, because it's a special place.
Yeah, thanks for shouting that out. There's all sorts of groups and stuff online, but if you're interested in this program and what we're discussing and how to contribute to this conversation, if you want to make sure we see something that you have to say, if you want to respond to the questions we prompt, I am pretty active there, kind of putting things out for people to respond to, and all sorts of conversations stem from it. People just start kind of going off on their own sub-threads, and so feel free. I want to read one more of these contributions that I imagine would relate to a number of others here and connects to the next thing that we're going to discuss. I never really felt less than as a mild hemo myself until I passed it on to my son. I wouldn't trade him for anything in this world, but when talking about having a child, I remember asking, "You sure you want to try to have a child with me? I might not give you a non-hemophiliac." I was made to be my son's mom and I do it as best I can, but I didn't want to go into a parenting relationship without the dad knowing the hurdles we could face. And I mean, that opens up a whole nother important discussion point around, when you disclose these kind of things in the context of an intimate relationship, you want to set yourself, your future family, your partner, all of it up for success. At the same time, I think we've talked about this on here before. I know back in my dating days, I couldn't get out of a first date, and generally not even out of like the first 15 minutes without hemophilia coming up. It was just like impossible. And in retrospect, I'm like, I probably was a little bit intense for a number within the first like 10, 15 minutes. I'm like, let's talk rare disease and grief and resilience and striving to be better. Blah. Like people are like, can we just talk about like the weather? And so, yeah, in retrospect, I'm like, I think I know why some of those second dates didn't happen. I think I know now, but hey,
all of us, I mean, hemophilia or not, we've all been there. You know what I'm saying?
But, I guess as a kind of a closing thought, and we are going to now talk about mild hemophilia here in a moment, but I guess as a closing thought on this, from me anyway, it was really helpful to talk about this with Ralph. Shout out to Ralph. It's really helpful to talk about this with Ralph because it's funny. It's easier now on the podcast with you, even though that this is a public facing thing that we are recording live. So it's not even like there's a chance to be like, hey, could you cut the part where I revealed this? Even though that's all true, it's easier right now for me to talk about times where I have felt less than if you and I were just out in the common area being two people in the world. It's not an easy thing for me to discuss, and I feel sheepish about it at times. And in part because, this perception thing, there's a lot of angles to it. I think sometimes what's the word I'm looking for? Internalize a perception of myself that doesn't relate to the internal experience of me being me. And I think I've said this before, and it's going to sound weird coming out of my mouth, but like, as a guy who's 6'2" and, with a jawline, like people are like, oh, you look like you're doing all right. Like you look good. Great. I can't tell you how many times I have had someone say something like that to me, like you look like you're doing well, or you look great, or, kind of dismiss if I was like, yeah, I've been having a little, like, you look great. And it's like, so what? Like, well, who cares what I look like? That's not my experience. I don't feel great. My body doesn't feel zhuzhed. I'm glad the journal looks that way, and I'm glad that I can, put on a good face. I'm glad that I can choose to be happy and choose to be positive, even if I'm having pain and it's got me feeling anxious about whatever. But I have realized there's like an actual impact of that kind of internalized perception. People perceiving, it's not like I want to be seen as weak or like, definitely not. But there are times where like I'm perceived as being either stronger or more abled or like more capable, or hemophilia isn't serious enough. And it's other people's stuff. But I got to be honest, I historically have a difficult time not internalizing that. And it makes it all the more difficult to share feelings of feeling less than or insecure or, not up for the task, or like, oh, actually, I do need help here. And that makes me less than.
I guess how I just kind of want to close this comment as someone who doesn't have hemophilia, I just want to say to you and to all of our listeners that I hope in a way you can feel heard and validated in these feelings. And I desperately want you to know that you do matter, and everything that you're going through, it does matter. And we understand you here at BloodStream, and we love you very much just as you are. Flaws and pain and irritability and all.
And Tammy's point from earlier, there's a lot of these kinds of feelings that for us with hemophilia or VWD or various chronic stuff might be exacerbated at a certain time or compounded. They're not
indivisible.
Invisible,
not indivisible.
Yeah, not
invisible to the world. Yeah,
but hard. They're not unrelatable. Even people feel these things maybe not in the same way or as often or as chronically or whatever, but they're not totally foreign feelings. And if you are someone who like, there were a couple people who shared and are clearly struggling at the moment. And there were other folks who jumped in to be like, hey, are you using resources and whatever else? If you fall into that bucket, that's okay too. You're allowed to struggle. You're allowed to be down. That's fine. And if you're stepping forward to identify that in comment threads, that's actually a great sign. Just make sure that you're continuing to seek connections, seek opportunities for support. Don't let yourself get stuck in a place of not doing well or feeling, less than for too long. Just it's okay, but at the same time, just keep an eye on yourself. And that's a general word of advice to friends and family out there. All right. So 2 headlines I want to hit before we get into Let's Talk for the day. Mentioned it in the opening. Females account for 1 in 5 mild hemophilia cases at U.S. centers. Nearly 1/5 of patients with mild hemophilia admitted to treatment centers in the United States are female, according to a large study of nearly 30,000 people. This is from Hemophilia News Today, by the way. Yet, women and girls make up a smaller proportion of patients with severe or moderate hemophilia, ranging from less than 0.5% to a little more than 1%. These findings, nevertheless, highlight the needs for specialized care based on disease severity for females with hemophilia, the researchers wrote. Amy Board, why does this matter?
Why does this matter? Well, my ladies listening are like, it so matters. It matters because for years and years and decades and decades and decades, women have been classified as carriers. And I think that's not just like how we say it in the community. It's from a medical perspective, and it's from like a payer coding perspective. So you will be labeled in the computer system of the world, of the medical world, as a carrier.
Who cares? Why does that matter?
Who cares? Why does that matter? Because you can't get certain treatment because carriers aren't, quote unquote, a patient with hemophilia. So you might have more trouble getting your clotting factor. You might have more trouble getting a treatment plan without pretty intense advocacy. So the trend nowadays is slowly starting to change how we diagnose women and to change that very specific naming diagnosis, which all my ladies at home are like, yeah, duh. Everyone's excited about it. So if you are diagnosed with mild hemophilia, and most women, I shouldn't say most, but so many women who are carriers have those numbers. They legitimately fall into the mild hemophilia category, and so they should be treated as such. So it's a big, kind of push and debate right now between clinicians and payers.
And this bit of research, if you're someone who is struggling to get either a comprehensive care visit or treatment, to get factor treatment so that you can have an upcoming surgery and whatever the case may be, this kind of published research is the type of thing that can help your advocacy efforts. So I'd say if you do fall into the category, to Amy's point, where you've been denied a medical claim of some kind because you're a carrier, not a patient, if you know that you have some upcoming health needs where your needs as someone with mild hemophilia are important to address, like a surgery, something you need to prepare for, I would say find this title, Females Account for 1 in 5 Mild Hemophilia Cases at U.S. Centers, program notes, just use Google, save it, print it, talk to your local advocacy organization, make sure they're aware of it. Is there anything else they can do and provide you with resources to make your case to your insurance company or whoever the case the case needs to be made with, maybe something like that. That was almost a sentence.
Amazing.
More or less.
Amazing.
Because this does matter. It's not just semantics.
It's
not just some piece of also ran journalism. This is saying that 20% of people with mild hemophilia are female. That's news. That's not something that is in the common vernacular.
Correct.
And there's specificity that while moderate and severe, still very small portion of the population, important, but very small portion of the population, 20% of mild patients is not a small portion of the population. That is a large subset of the population. Correct. And now we have some research to support those needs. So that is important, as is this. Syrians claim first case of girl with both hemophilia A and C. She needed to have it. She needed more.
She needed more.
One wasn't enough. Letters are wonderful.
It's the wording's interesting. They claim.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. I'm just reading headlines. Yeah, this is not editorializing at all.
Yeah, they get her.
Yeah, yeah, hey, everybody. It's like a luggage at a gate, the baggage check.
Jeez Louise.
So just to read a little bit here from the article, a report describes, for the first time, according to study authors, the case of a girl who has both hemophilia A and C. To date, only 10 such cases had been documented in medical literature.
All male.
All male. As an FYI, and this was pulled, I should admit, from Wikipedia, which did cite actual published research, but it was like too many links. I was like, okay, if you want more, do more research. But if you're asking, what is hemophilia C? So hemophilia C, that's factor 11 deficiency. It mainly occurs in Ashkenazi Jews, interestingly enough, and is believed to affect approximately 8% of that population. Less commonly, hemophilia C can be found in Jews of Iraqi ancestry and in Israeli Arabs. The condition has been described in other populations at around 1% of cases, so you can see quite a disparity between Ashkenazi Jews and then like larger populations. It is an autosomal recessive disorder. There is little spontaneous bleeding, but surgical procedures may cause excess blood loss, and prophylaxis is required. Again, that summation is based on research, but in Wikipedia, not doctors, definitely do more research. Factor 11, in terms of like, what does it do? What does its dysfunction actually mean for bleeding purposes? Factor 11 is what activates factor 9. So as we maybe know, factor 8 and factor 9 work together. Hemophilia A is if you're missing factor 8. Hemophilia B is if you're missing factor 9. 8 and 9 work in tandem to activate factor 10. And that's important because factor 10 is responsible for activating thrombin, and thrombin is like the real workhorse gate, and without thrombin the whole thing falls apart. So getting to activated thrombin is critical. 10 does that. 10 needs 8 and 9 to get itself activated. If 11's not activating 9, 8 has no running mate, and there's no 10 to activate. So that's where the chain can fall apart due to dysfunction in factor 11, also known as hemophilia C. Natalie and I actually, back in the day, Rebecca was her, Rebecca Haber. She had and found out in her pregnancy that she had hemophilia C. So she came on, she came to our place. We were recording from home, and she was like 8 months pregnant, the size of a small planet.
Oh my God.
Natalie and I were laughing about this back in the beginning of this year when she was at 8 months. Like, Rebecca came to our house to do that podcast. She had to come up the stairs. Like we just had so much more appreciation for like, wow, that was really generous of her and her husband to come and do all that with us. But to talk about what does it mean when you get diagnosed with something like hemophilia C, a rare genetic blood disorder, while you're pregnant. And like, whoa, okay, new thing to consider. Also, I'm pregnant. Also, this is absolutely going to bear out on my pregnancy. So she was working on how to get factor to the pregnancy. Like it became a thing. So,
and I will say NHF is doing phenomenal rare bleeding disorder work right now. And we were lucky enough to be in the inside, if you will, for BDC numbers. And the numbers for rare bleeding disorders that showed up for that conference and that track were really impressive. They were big. So hats off to NHF. And if you're watching and if you're a rare, connect with us. We'd love to hear your story. We'd love to hear your experience of what it's been like. I'm sure you might feel a little bit less than even within the hemophilia community because it might be a little odd. So anyway, we're just here for you. And I'm so glad that they're continuing to reach out and do more education for those rare disorders.
And if there's something from all of those resources and education that's been particularly poignant for you as somebody affected by a rare blood disorder, let us know. Share that with us. There's all we always talk about mailbag at bloodstreammedia.com. There's the Facebook page, the Instagram channel. We also have a voice message option. So if you go to the Bloodstream podcast page or
Patrick
click the
loves this option.
bit.ly/allbloodstream link or the check out all our shows link in the program notes, you'll see the leave a voice message. And if you just want to like 2-minute dump, hey, here's my story and you're welcome to use it or not. That's a great way you can do it too. So lots of ways that you can get in touch with us.
You don't even have to write anything.
You don't have to write.
That's what we're moving towards. You don't even have to write anymore.
Speaking of, just before we transition into our Let's Talk segment with Joshua Sterling Bragg, can I tell you, speaking of not having to write anymore, earlier today, I was editing something unrelated to the podcast that Josh was participating in. And it was Josh's voice. It sounded so strange at times. And I had notes about like, this sounds disconnected. Do we cut from like different takes of this same sentence? But they were like relatively simple sentences. So I was like, why is it that it's like, after I walk through the door, I close it? And you're like, what happened in the last two words? It's some automated program that like you record a certain amount of things and then you type and it like does your voice saying that stuff, even though you never said it.
Oh, so you thought it was like an actual interview? Like it was an actual thing?
It was presented to me for editing. And it was like, it was just placeholder audio of Josh's script with his like machine voice.
So you gave notes?
I was like, well, again, it was presented to me for give notes. And then it was like, that was a machine. And I was like, okay, well then I'll wait till the human records. Are we using AI now? What? But it was very, very strange. So you're right. We don't have to write. We don't have to record.
We don't have to do anything.
Everything is a deep fake.
Yeah. In 3 months, you won't even see us. You guys are just going to see placeholders.
You'll just think about us and we'll show up in your head.
We're going to be a hologram.
In front of microphones. It's a nightmare.
Hologram.
That's a nightmare. Okay. So we're going to move into the Let's Talk segment. On today's Let's Talk segment, film cinematographer and segment host Joshua Sterling Bragg, with his own voice and his own picture, real him, highlights some of the barriers that prevent people from coming forward and talking about anxiety, stress, or whatever might be going on with them. Using stories from the Believe Limited film supported by Sanofi Genzyme, Let's Talk, along with his own personal experiences and input from mental health professionals, Josh explores what causes barriers like these in the first place and offers up some ideas for what we can do about them. On today's segment, Josh shares a stunning personal experience and explores the role of a support person or a caregiver with contributions from Hemophilia Treatment Center clinical psychologist, Dr. Emily Wheat. Let's Talk's a partnership between BloodStream Media, Believe Limited, and Sanofi Genzyme, and aims to create an environment where we can have open, honest conversations about mental health in the bleeding disorders community. For people living with or caring for someone with a bleeding disorder, the impact on mental health is largely invisible and not often discussed. Let's Talk shares tips on how to care for your own or someone you love's mental health and strives to eliminate the stigma associated with this discussion within the bleeding disorders community. And now, over to Josh for the latest Let's Talk.
A few weeks ago, I had the most intense mental health experience. And had my wife not been there, and had I not been able to identify what was going on, I might have called an ambulance and gone to the hospital. I had a panic attack in public, and it was awful. But I made it through. Let's talk. Okay, so a few weeks ago, I was having a small vacation. Well, it was really more of a staycation. And I was sitting outside at a restaurant with my wife when my hand started to shake. It was 102 degrees out because, California. And we had ordered some hot food that had just come to the table. And as the waitress left and I was removing my mask, I noticed this tremor in my hand. "You probably just need to eat some food," my wife said. And I nodded in agreement and started to eat. Well, a few moments later, I was feeling really hot. And even though it was 102 outside, we were in the shade and under mist coming out of a little bit of irrigation in the awning. Regardless, I got unreasonably sweaty. I took my hat off and sweat poured down onto my shoulders. My hand was shaking worse. And my wife said, "Just go splash some water on your face." So I put on my mask and I went to the bathroom and I walked in circles for a moment only to find that there was no sink. It was a shared sink in the hall. And I didn't want to be weird, so I just washed my hands and I went back to the table. My wife started to talk to me, but all I could hear was muffled sound. I was dizzy and disoriented and full of water. I mean, I must have had 3 or 4 glasses at the table before this all happened. I'm a big fan of hydration. And Courtney had gotten the check and said, "Forget about the food, let's just get you home," and started to walk me to the car. And I was really embarrassed that this was happening and ashamed that I had ruined lunch. And as we walked, I started hyperventilating and my vision started to darken around the edges and I became dizzy and emotional. In fact, I started sobbing at the crosswalk, and once it started, it just kept coming. The tears, the hyperventilating, the tunnel vision, the dizziness, the shame, all piling on top of me. I just wanted to lie down right where I was and curl up in a ball. But my wife helped me focus and got me to the car and blasted my face with air conditioning. And as I felt the cool air blowing on my face, I remembered something my therapist said. that there have been studies, and without a doubt, actual feelings tend to pass within 90 seconds. And if I could just get to 90 seconds without fanning the flames, I'd be okay. And I was. I was okay. The moment passed, and I got control of my thinking, and, well, then we went to Target and looked at Halloween decorations. That was my first real panic attack. It was really intense and scary and completely out of left field. I feel very lucky to have had my partner there to guide me and a couple of weeks of therapy under my belt to give me some tools to get through that moment. My wife and I were able to identify what was going on because the symptoms of my mental health were on the surface. But there are struggles that are just as intense that creep in much more slowly. Listen to this clip from our documentary, Let's Talk Mental Health, where Dana and Esther talk about an example of what that might look like.
Women with bleeding disorders have different challenges because of the genetics of hemophilia and the recessive gene, and mom passes it to her son. It's very common, and I think mothers maybe talk to each other, but often suffer in silence with this too. But it's common for them to feel guilty that they pass this problem along to their kid. There's nothing that can be done about it if you want to have a child. That's a flip of a coin, and it's a chance that it's going to happen. But that didn't matter. When their kid was suffering and they're taking them to the emergency room in the middle of the night, all that logic goes out the window. And you do what you got to do, but you feel horrible that your kid's suffering in pain because of a genetic condition you carried in your body and passed along to him or her.
Does it hurt? Just when it goes in, it's going to hurt a little bit. But then it'll be okay. It won't? It will, just a little bit.
I felt guilt. This is not passed down to a son from a father. It's passed down from a mother. So it was all on me. And I knew that. I said, I want proof. I want to know. Like, do I have it? Am I carrier of this? Should I know? Is it in my family's bloodline? How did I not know this? Why didn't I do more tests before to know that I could carry this? So we had the blood work done, and I am not a carrier. It's a spontaneous mutation in Joaquin, so he's the first in our family. Culturally, being of Mexican descent, we hold a lot of things in. We don't speak of any issues because I don't even know how to say it in English exactly. We're chismosos. One person tells the story and it just snowballs into a bigger story. So if you can control the narrative by not saying anything, you don't give them anything to snowball into something great. I've even told my daughters, and now I realize that's my cultural baggage of me saying, don't tell all your friends. There's no reason to tell them. And I did tell them that when they were 10 and 11 years old. But I was taking away a little bit of their healing process. You reach out to friends and you tell them what's up because you need support. I took it away from them, but it was part of my baggage of we don't talk about those things. We just didn't grow up where you tell everybody your household problems. You just don't. And now we're sort of easing up on that and saying, it's your story.
There are no rules for what mental health strain looks like, and none of us can read minds. Without communication, we have no way of knowing what kind of stress we might be putting on others, and likewise, our partners, friends, or family might not be able to see the stress that we're putting on ourselves. We have to not only talk to each other, but listen intently. But how does one go about handling someone else's mental health strain? Well, here's what a clinical psychologist had to say about it.
We're here with Emily Wheat, clinical psychologist at the University of Colorado, HTC. And Emily, what role should a loved one play in the mental health of another?
I think it's really important that a loved one works to support their partner, significant other, child when it comes to a mental health concern, but also to know that they don't have to own that concern. I think it's also important to know that when you're supporting a loved one who may have some sort of mental health concern that they're managing, that you may be asked to make some changes too. And so kind of figuring out how to strike that balance is really important.
Striking a balance, compromising, hearing each other, and making some changes. These are not easy things to do. It takes work and sacrifice and a lot of communication. When I look back on my panic attack, I see that Courtney really put me first in that moment. She helped me to communicate, to identify the symptoms of my situation, and to find a resolution. But she didn't take on my stress or anxiety. I was feeling shame about ruining a nice lunch during vacation, while she was focusing on the passing moment of emotional overload in her partner, and didn't care about the food or being in public. She just cared about me. And at the end of the day, that was the best thing for both of us. I hope this was helpful and encouraging. Talking can be really healing. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Amy and Patrick, for having me on to talk and explore these topics. If you want access to some incredible mental health resources, you want to explore the film on your own, or you just want to dig deeper, please go to check out letstalkmh.com and click resources. I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you to Dr. Emily Wheat. Shout out to Esther for that latest from the Let's Talk podcast segment. The few things there that I'd love to just touch on with you, Amy. One of the things that really stood out to me, and I'm sure it's influenced by what we discussed earlier with feeling less than, but when Esther gets into her story about controlling the narrative with her children and not encouraging them not to share about their bleeding disorder, not to make themselves targets, but then refers like, that's my cultural baggage. It really resonated and I've seen that clip plenty of times and seen that, but it really resonated with me thinking about feeling less than, because that idea of like controlling the narrative, it comes from that same kind of place. I don't want to be found out. I don't want to reveal this truth. I don't want to be seen for this thing that is true about me, because if I am, I could become a target. It could be used against me. I won't be safe. So I'm going to try to control the narrative to make sure that that doesn't happen. It's like hard to argue with that just writ large, because life is unfair and people can be unkind and school children can be unkind and humans can be unkind. And so the instinct to want to protect not only yourself, but of course your children makes perfect sense. But I really appreciate the evolution of Esther's thought and the way she articulates it in the film, how like over time realizing, it's ultimately their choice about how they want to live with this part of their story. If they want it to be something that is out in front or more accessible, that's okay. That's okay too. I need to get over that. Like that's actually okay for them. But I totally, not even as a parent, just like controlling the narrative because it's not safe if I don't, that really resonated with me.
I agree. And I think, I think it kind of, that controlling the narrative can also, not only from a caregiver perspective, but also from like an individual perspective of like, I'm going to try to manage these feelings and these sensations that I'm having inside in order to like be normal or to, appear that I am not less than, I think is like a very significant piece of like that mental, emotional, psychosocial health. Like it's almost detrimental to the work of like trying to manage through that rather than just being comfortable enough to accept like this is what it is. Rob says that to me all the time. Actually, like when I get worked up and is it okay to be as you are right in this moment? you know, just kind of like an invitation of like, well, this is, it's not great right now. Is it okay to do that?
Right. Is it okay for it to be not great? I have a similar kind of thing I do with myself around, is it okay to not be comfortable right now? Am I okay not being comfortable? Oh, I'm not comfortable.
Right.
Is that okay?
Right.
Oh, I'm stressed. Is that okay?
Right.
You know, and I've actually found you and I have a larger discussion on anxiety to have in the not too distant future, my friend.
Yeah.
But for the time being, I will say, I have found that I made a change in medication not long ago. And what I've noticed now, a couple months into this change, is that it's easier for me to accept when I'm stressed or overwhelmed or feeling a little less than without it then being exacerbated by anxiety or anxious thoughts and feelings about the stress or about the less than, which then compound off each other and just start this whole chaotic mess in my head. I've noticed that the track I'm currently on, I'm still noticing I experience stress in these ways and I experience this in this way, but there's like not this other element that then kicks in. I think the medication, while serving me well in some areas, one of the side effects was increased anxiety. And I'd stopped taking the medication. I may as well just say that as part of what I'm sharing here. And what I've realized is like, oh shoot, that was raising my anxiousness more than I realized. And that was for years.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a bigger topic. And I've continually been checking in about, am I mad about this? I don't think I'm mad about this. And I'm not mad about it. I don't think. But stopping this and then feeling like, wow, for years, levels of anxiety I've been dealing with have now pretty clearly, irrefutably been influenced by this medication that was serving some other mental needs, but like, dang, that was kind of intense.
Wow.
And it's been such a relief to be like, oh, I don't have to feel that way.
Yes.
And I can feel stressed and I can feel tired and I can feel this. And it doesn't then also become this like rocket ship out the top of my head. And kind of a big deal. And I was real slow to want to stop taking this stuff too, because it was working for depression.
Right.
Here we go, everybody, because we're getting into it. So the treatment, unfortunately, sometimes the treatment for depression has a side effect of anxiety. And it's like, well, shoot, I got a little bit of both going on here. For me, this is how it played out. I needed the depression thing, but it exacerbated my anxiety. And now that I've phased off of it, I'm like, you know what? I seem to have stabilized a bit in this other area and I have different tools and have processed some things through. And that anxiety piece has reduced a whole lot since I've stopped. So that's where I am.
Just to bring up what we said in the beginning, to tie it all back together, we talk a lot, but we haven't talked about that.
We have not talked about that. That is true.
I will say, I'm just going to say this because I think this is a little important for me personally, because we're all in this thing together. I've been thinking about it for a while, but at some point, today's not the day, but at some point, it's important for me, I think, to share my anxiety struggle with you as a community member. It's been a thing and it's important, and it's just important to talk about it and to normalize it. It's taken me a long time. And so that day will come. And I've thought a lot about it. I was going to write like a social media post or a blog or something, and maybe I'll do that. But, I don't know, out of respect and just fellow, I think friendships here in this community, I think I will share it with you guys first. So more to come on that.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
I also appreciate the respect for the community that you're, that you just explicitly stated in there, wanting to kind of.
Well, y'all make me feel safe. I don't know if y'all feel safe with y'all, but it's just kind of nice. Y'all are great. I've been with you guys for decades now. I don't know. So I don't know. Let me know if that's not true.
All right. Well, good. We'll figure out when the right time is for that. So thanks again to Josh, Dr. Wheat, and Esther.
Yes.
And to Sanofi Genzyme for the partnership on Let's Talk. Again, the goal there is that we're trying to eliminate the stigma that's associated with open conversations about anxiety, depression, being overwhelmed, panic attacks, the whole kit and caboodle. If you like this kind of material, there is an entire page of the BloodStream Podcast's website dedicated to the Let's Talk segment. So if you go to bloodstreammedia.com, go to the BloodStream Podcast, and you will see the giant tab for the Let's Talk segment with all of Josh's Let's Talk led segments. Yeah. Or the Josh led Let's Talk segments. That probably would have been a better way to say it. But hey, we live, no editing. So we're going to be back again on the 8th of October.
Yes.
Mel will be here to talk about pain, chronic pain pod. Might be another guest. There's some other topics. We're still figuring things out. We got a little bit of time. But in the meantime, I want to say, again, thank you to Santa Fe Genzyme. Thanks as well to our presenting sponsor, Takeda,
Yes.
bleedingdisorders.com, for wherever on your journey you may be. And thanks to our segment sponsor, Genentech. Visit treathemophilia.com today to learn more. And with that, that is all for this episode.
That's going to be about it. Make sure to check out the program notes in your podcast player or on bloodstreammedia.com for the links related to all the stories and segments that you heard today. And there were a couple of links, so make sure to check that out.
Important links.
If you will. And if you'd like to connect with us, we talk about it all the time, about anything, ideas, casting opportunities, anything, please email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com or connect with us on social media, because we're everywhere on social media.
We are everywhere.
You'll find us on Facebook and Instagram or Twitter. You can follow me or Patrick. Please follow Patrick on Facebook. Like, don't be a dummy. Also, you can follow Patrick on LinkedIn. And I think someone is going to refresh my LinkedIn page.
Guys, we've been on this journey together. It was real hard in the beginning. We all remember the resistance. I'm going to get a super cut of Amy's LinkedIn journey, wherever on her journey she may be. That's what I'm going to get. Takeda, wherever on your bleeding disorders journey you may be. Patrick James Lynch, wherever on your LinkedIn journey you may be. Okay, so we'll get that for next time. And until that
LinkedIn.
next time, I'm your host, Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm your other host, Amy Board.
Back again October 8th. Don't forget, subscribe wherever you listen, leave reviews, share the show. Until the 8th, take self-care of yourself. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.